Be me, Ethan, 36, Operations Strategy Lead. We build replacement parts for tractors, trailers, and fleet service trucks. Nothing glamorous happens here unless you count preventing expensive failures glamorous. Customers remember us only when deliveries slip or machines stop moving. When parts arrive on time, everyone forgets our name by lunch. The office looks like a tired insurance branch from 1998. Gray carpet, humming lights, and coffee brewed from old resentment. I stayed 9 years because real systems still make sense to me. People can lie all day, but production schedules usually tell the truth. My team is small, useful, and mostly ignored by corporate people. Walt Hendricks runs manufacturing engineering and supplier qualification work for us. He is 61, blunt, calm, and impossible to impress. Steel-toe boots under office khakis, notebook always open, phone always silent. He can hear one proposal and predict 3 hidden failures. He can read supplier emails like weather reports before storms. Nico Alvarez handles automation dashboards, alerts, and machine-side reporting tools. He is 24, quiet, and annoyingly competent before morning coffee. Kid carries 2 laptops and a screwdriver like medical instruments. He fixes line alerts before supervisors finish blaming maintenance. We are the kind of people nobody photographs for recruiting posts. We are also the people keeping the building from catching fire. For years, that arrangement worked better than management deserved. Sales sold promises, operations built parts, finance complained, and customers mostly stayed happy. Then CEO Mark Ellison decided we needed transformation across the company. Not lean improvements, not maintenance upgrades, not supplier cleanup work. Capital T transformation, the kind with posters and kickoff videos. Mark is not stupid, but he loves sounding visionary to the board. Every quarterly meeting turns him into a podcast guest somehow. Then Lauren Price walked into our building with consultant energy. Late 30s, polished, charismatic, and always speaking in complete headlines. Her title took 2 lines in the announcement email: Director of Transformation and Strategic Change Programs. Every word sounded expensive before she even started working. First month, honestly, she looked mostly harmless to me. She remembered names, asked polished questions, and brought cleaner meeting agendas. She talked about visibility, collaboration, and breaking operational silos. Nobody hates better agendas on principle, especially in this place. HR loved her almost immediately and started quoting her in newsletters. Internal communications posted photos from her workshops every Friday afternoon. Mark looked at her like she was a board-ready miracle. She started with communication sessions and leadership-style trainings. Annoying but survivable and mostly easy to ignore. Then she started changing production-facing processes without understanding production constraints. She wanted fewer siloed decisions and more cross-functional ownership checkpoints. Translation: she wanted approvals routed through her transformation steering group. That steering group included HR, internal comms, ESG, and 1 finance analyst. It included 0 plant planners and 0 supplier quality engineers. Walt raised a concern during one of her rollout meetings. He stayed calm and used his usual funeral director voice. He explained supplier changes require validation, documentation, and sometimes customer approval windows. He said committee-driven timing could create hidden delivery risk very quickly. Lauren gave him a patient smile that made my skin crawl. She said resistance is common when organizations move from control toward trust. Then she warned the room about legacy gatekeeping behavior. That sentence landed like a slap nobody wanted to discuss. Walt just nodded once and wrote something in his notebook. Later, he showed me the page while reheating stale leftovers. It said in block letters, "Trust does not cast steel." I almost choked laughing and then immediately felt tired again. Conflicts kept stacking up in clean corporate language. Lauren introduced new operational KPIs for the next board cycle. None were technically fake, which made them harder to fight. She wanted inventory days cut aggressively before quarter-close numbers. She wanted supplier diversity targets accelerated on the same timeline. She wanted added sign-off steps so every team felt represented. Each goal sounded reasonable alone, especially inside a polished slide deck. Together in our business, they made a fragile mess. I sent her a memo instead of arguing in meetings. 4 pages, clear risks, dependencies, and realistic sequencing options. Walt added a supplier exposure appendix for critical part families. Nico added a machine-level dashboard view showing line stoppage risk. Lauren replied with thanks and called the input valuable. Then she ignored almost every recommendation in that packet. 3 weeks later, sales landed our biggest opportunity in years. Prairie State Ag Fleet Cooperative wanted a multi-year replacement parts contract. Large volumes, strict service levels, price stability clauses, penalty language included. The kind of deal that changes hiring plans and capital budgets. Also the kind of account that dies from operational sloppiness. Sales and plant leadership expected my team to lead execution planning. Mark opened the kickoff by praising everyone for teamwork and vision. Then he announced Lauren would lead the cross-functional execution stream. He called it a chance to prove modern transformation creates performance. Lauren looked like she had just won an election on camera. She reframed the contract immediately as a strategic reinvention platform. Not just fulfillment work, but a company identity reset moment. Walt pinched the bridge of his nose and stared at the table. I asked for a planning session focused on capacity and supplier readiness. Lauren said we would start with narrative alignment before technical mapping. That phrase should have been my warning to update my resume. Instead, I stayed and tried again, because customers pay our salaries. Week 1. Her team booked the big conference room all day. Wall space filled with sticky notes, mood boards, and colored markers. Actual planning documents stayed untouched in shared folders. They debated language for customer-facing value statements for 2 afternoons. One meeting focused on whether reliability sounded emotionally exclusionary. Another meeting discussed visual tone for a future-ready farm ecosystem. Prairie State wanted guaranteed fill rates, not a farm ecosystem narrative. Walt printed supplier lead time reports and left them on Lauren's desk. He tabbed every section and highlighted critical path castings. 3 days later, the binder had a coffee ring on page 1. Nico got pulled into a workshop about dashboard democratization principles. He came back looking like someone stole his weekend and patience. They asked him for a warmer alert palette before launch. We still did our jobs and kept other customers moving, but we stopped doing free rescue work for people ignoring us. When Lauren's team asked for quick answers, we went literal. Everything helpful lived in the memos they refused to read. No sarcasm, no fights, just polite and painfully complete responses. They wanted shortcuts and we gave them documentation instead. Week 2. Lauren pushed a supplier switch through her steering group. The existing vendor was stable, ugly, and boring in good ways. The new vendor looked better on ESG reporting criteria. They also promised slightly lower prices and responsive partnership energy. Walt flagged qualification timing risks in writing that same afternoon. Lauren approved the switch anyway and copied Mark for visibility. Mark replied with a thumbs up and great momentum, team. I saved that email in a folder called Maybe Later. They also reduced safety stock on 2 critical part families. Lauren called it inventory discipline and balance sheet modernization. I called it gambling with someone else's season on the line. Prairie State onboarding meetings started getting tense by week 3. Their ops manager asked simple questions about fill rates and backups. Lauren answered with slides about transformation, governance, and shared ownership. The client stayed polite, but the silence after each answer got longer. Walt and I watched from the side seats, taking notes quietly. After one call, Prairie State's planner emailed me directly. She asked for a line-by-line readiness table and contingency routing options. I drafted the table in an hour and parked it unsent. Not because I wanted chaos, but because Lauren had locked communications. All client execution responses had to route through her office. I forwarded the draft internally and suggested sending it immediately. Lauren thanked me, then sent a 3-paragraph summary without numbers. Prairie State replied asking for the actual table by end of day. They did not get the actual table by end of day. They got a revised deck about strategic onboarding phases instead. That was the moment I started building a private recovery file. Walt was already ahead of me by at least a week. He had alternate suppliers mapped for every critical casting family. He also had qualification status notes and old contact names. Nico built a shadow dashboard tracking promised dates versus real confirmations. We never announced any of this to management. We were done arguing with people addicted to theater. We were not done protecting the business from avoidable stupidity. Week 4, the new ESG-friendly supplier slipped the first milestone. Not by much at first, just enough to create schedule pressure. Lauren called it normal onboarding noise and urged everyone to stay adaptive. Walt said the words, "This is how shortages start," very quietly. Then the second milestone slipped and the quantity came in short. Inspection found dimensional variance on a key housing batch. That batch fed 2 assemblies Prairie State needed in launch week. Plant scheduling started borrowing capacity from other customer orders. Finance got nervous because expedited freight requests suddenly appeared. Lauren held a meeting about communication discipline during stress periods. Walt declined politely and stayed on the plant floor. Nico sent me screenshots showing line utilization collapsing by Thursday. Prairie State noticed when their delivery window reports stopped matching promises. Their director sent a sharp email asking for immediate corrective action. Lauren went straight to Mark before the plant meeting started. She told him operations resistance was undermining transformation execution. She said my team was slow-rolling support and creating confusion. She used the word sabotage once, then softened it to non-alignment. Mark looked rattled enough to call a formal review that afternoon. HR joined, plus our CFO and the plant manager. Lauren arrived with a binder and a face built for sympathy. She said she had tried to modernize a legacy culture under pressure. She said old-school teams refused collaboration and withheld key information. She said I kept escalating concerns instead of enabling solutions. I let her finish because interruptions make bad stories look stronger. Then Mark turned to me and asked one question. "Ethan, what exactly is happening on this account right now?" I slid a folder across the table and opened my laptop. I showed timeline first because arguments die faster with timestamps. Risk memo dates, supplier warning emails, approval chains, and milestone slips. Lauren's approvals were all there, including the vendor switch decision. Walt's written objections were attached, acknowledged, and ignored. Nico's dashboard showed confirmation gaps days before client escalation emails. I showed the unsent readiness table request from Prairie State. I showed Lauren's response version that removed the useful details. I showed every recommendation our team made, with dates and attachments. Nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds after that. The plant manager leaned back and muttered, "Well, hell." Lauren tried to pivot and called the data selectively framed. Walt, who almost never raises his voice, finally stepped in. He said the parts either exist on time or they do not. Then he looked at Mark and stopped talking. Mark rubbed his face with both hands and stared at me. He asked the second question everyone should have asked earlier. "Can we still save this contract, and how fast?" I said yes, but only with immediate decision control. I told him I already had a recovery plan ready. Lauren's expression changed from defensive to genuinely confused. She looked offended that planning had happened without her. I said I was not there to win an argument. I was there to stop penalties and protect the customer relationship. Then I walked them through the plan in 6 steps. Freeze all non-essential transformation changes on Prairie State immediately. Restore direct ops to client execution communications for 30 days. Reactivate the previous supplier for critical castings using expedited terms. Run split source coverage on 2 high-risk part families temporarily. Resequence production around available components and protect Prairie State slots. Launch a daily control room call with actual owners and numbers. CFO asked how much this would cost in freight and overtime. I gave a range and the likely penalty exposure if we waited. My range was ugly, but the penalty number was uglier. Plant manager backed the resequencing plan without hesitation. Walt confirmed old supplier contacts were still reachable and qualified. Nico said he could deploy a live dashboard by evening. Mark asked Lauren whether she objected to emergency control transfer. She said sidelining transformation would send the wrong cultural message. The room went cold in a way I still remember. Mark looked at her like he finally heard her clearly. Then he assigned Prairie State Recovery Authority to me, effective immediately. He copied the decision to the executive team before we left. He also told Lauren to route all account input through me. She opened her mouth, then saw the CFO watching her. That was the first moment she realized the floor was gone. We moved fast because speed matters more than dignity in recoveries. Walt called the old supplier from the parking lot. He did not beg, he simply spoke their language. He acknowledged the earlier switch and said we needed emergency coverage. They quoted bad pricing, tighter terms, and limited weekend capacity. Walt accepted before they finished the second sentence. Then he called quality and started validation paperwork immediately. I called Prairie State's operations director and asked for 30 minutes. No decks, no slogans, just a recovery schedule and daily milestones. He sounded angry, which is fair, but he stayed on the call. I told him exactly what failed and what we changed that day. I did not defend anyone and I did not spin anything. I gave him a daily reporting time and named the owners. There was a long pause, then he said one thing. If your numbers hold tomorrow, we keep talking. Good enough for day one, and better than we deserved. Nico built the recovery dashboard by 6 that evening. Machine availability, supplier confirmations, transit status, backlog, and risk flags. Green meant confirmed, yellow meant exposed, red meant no excuses. The dashboard sat on a screen in the war room. Everyone hated it because it told the truth fast. We started 7 a.m. control calls the next morning. Plant planner, shipping lead, quality, purchasing, Walt, Nico, and me. Sometimes the plant manager joined if the backlog looked ugly. We ended every call with owners and due times. No circle back language, no vibes, no wandering discussion. Lauren tried to re-enter on day 2 with a revised framework deck. She asked to present communication principles before the client update call. I told her we were already on the call. She sent Mark a note saying I was excluding stakeholders. Mark forwarded it to me with 3 words. Focus on the recovery. That email now lives beside the thumbs up one. Day 3, Lauren showed up uninvited in the war room. She started suggesting softer phrasing for delay explanations. Walt kept typing and did not look at her once. Nico turned his laptop so the screen faced away. I asked if she had updated supplier confirmations or transport bookings. She said she was there to align the message. I said we were aligning shipments and she could email notes. She stood there for a few seconds, visibly boiling. Then she walked out while the shipping lead pretended not to notice. Prairie State's numbers improved by the end of that week. Not perfect, but stable enough to rebuild credibility slowly. We recovered one critical backlog lane using split weekend runs. Quality cleared the emergency castings without major surprises. Expedited freight burned cash like a furnace, but deliveries landed. The client's tone changed from furious to skeptical. Skeptical is a gift when trust is damaged. It means they still think you might earn it back. Lauren made one last push during the second week. She requested a meeting with Mark and HR again. This time she argued emergency governance was becoming a power grab. She said my team was creating a hostile environment for collaboration. Mark asked HR to review communication records from the war room. There was nothing dramatic to find because we stayed painfully professional. Short agendas, factual updates, direct asks, documented owners, and timestamps. HR had nothing useful to hang on us. The CFO, however, had a lot to say about cost exposure. He pointed out which decisions created the recovery spend. Those decisions had Lauren's approval trail all over them. After that meeting, things changed quickly and very quietly. Mark announced a temporary structural adjustment for business continuity. Lauren was reassigned away from revenue accounts and plant operations. Officially, she moved into internal culture programs and engagement initiatives. Same floor as HR, internal communications, and employee event planning. Unofficially, she lost any lever that could break deliveries. She still had a title and an office badge. She just no longer touched supplier choices or execution timelines. The day she moved, nobody celebrated out loud. This was a factory, not a movie set. People mostly kept working and watched from the edges. I saw 2 framed certificates, a plant and a ring light. Someone from HR helped carry a box down the hallway. Lauren kept her face composed until she passed the war room. Then she glanced through the glass and saw the dashboard wall. Walt was reviewing transit confirmations with the shipping lead. Nico was patching a data feed while chewing stale pretzels. I was on the phone with Prairie State discussing fill rate targets. No speeches, no branded templates, no transformation posters. Just the business moving again without her in the room. Her expression did not look angry first. It looked confused, then insulted, then suddenly very small. She kept walking before anyone made eye contact. We stayed on recovery mode for another 3 weeks. By then, the daily control calls had become a rhythm. Prairie State requested fewer explanations and more forecast detail. That was a good sign because operational people trust behavior. We restored the original supplier as primary on critical castings. The ESG vendor stayed on a limited trial for non-critical parts. Walt insisted on that structure and nobody argued this time. Nico expanded the dashboard into a permanent execution control board. Plant supervisors started using it for other customer programs. The plant manager asked if we could roll it site-wide. He asked Nico directly and copied me, which felt like progress. Mark started showing up to a few morning calls. He never apologized for the mess because executives rarely do. But he listened more and talked less after that. Prairie State sent their operations director for an on-site review. The same guy who sounded ready to fire us over speakerphone. We walked him through the floor, schedules, supplier backups, and controls. He asked hard questions and wrote everything down carefully. When we reached the war room, he stopped at the dashboard. He said this was the first thing he should have seen. I told him he was completely right about that. He looked at me for a second and nodded once. 2 days later, he sent a revised status letter. No penalties triggered if service levels held for 60 days. Conditional continuation, stricter reporting, and a warning about future tolerance. In other words, we were alive and on probation. For Mid-River, that counted as a miracle with paperwork. Mark called an executive debrief after the first stable month. He asked me for recommendations on account governance changes. I came prepared because I had learned my lesson. Single owner for revenue-critical execution decisions. Mandatory risk sign-off from engineering on supplier switches. Client-facing readiness tables required before onboarding milestones. No non-operational approval gates on emergency recovery actions. Clear thresholds for executive intervention based on service risk. CFO supported every point before I finished the list. Plant manager added 3 more and looked relieved doing it. Mark approved the package and asked me to implement it. Then he created a new role and gave it to me. Director of Operational Execution and Recovery Planning. Title still too long, but at least it described real work. Walt finally got formal authority over supplier qualification governance. He pretended not to care, then bought better notebooks. Nico got budget for a small automation analyst team. He acted annoyed and spent the same afternoon drafting hiring specs. Prairie State hit target service levels by the end of quarter. They extended the contract review period instead of terminating it. 3 months later, they expanded volume on 2 part families. Not because we gave a great presentation, because the numbers stayed boring for long enough. The funny part is, Lauren was not actually fired. Corporate places rarely choose the clean ending people want. She stayed in the internal office wing near HR and comms. That area ran trainings, engagement surveys, and culture events. Mostly women worked there, plus 1 exhausted facilities coordinator. Once in a while I passed her hallway after leadership meetings. Through the glass I saw whiteboards full of themes and calendars. Employee Spotlight Week, listening circles, volunteer day photo plans. Useful work maybe, just not work that could sync contracts. One morning, months later, I ran into Lauren at the copier. She looked tired but less theatrical than before. No consultant armor, no stage voice, no audience smile. Just a gray sweater and a stack of survey printouts. She said hello first, which surprised me more than it should. I said morning and reached for my documents. There was a weird pause, quiet but not hostile. Then she said, Mark moved fast once the numbers were visible. I told her numbers usually move people when slides stop working. She gave a short laugh that sounded like defeat. Then she said she thought resistance meant fear. I said sometimes it means someone already sees the failure point. She looked down at the survey pages and nodded. No apology scene, no movie dialogue, no dramatic closure. Just two tired employees near a copier before 9 a.m. I walked back to the war room with my printouts. The dashboard was up, shipments were moving, and Walt was complaining softly. Nico was rewriting an alert script because yellow flags were too noisy. Normal day, which is the best kind in this business. People think power belongs to whoever talks the loudest in meetings. In places like ours, power usually belongs to whoever fixes what breaks. And if you ignore that long enough, the factory teaches you anyway.